Mr. Mack-Poole, 3-minute history, Detente. And what is Detente? Well, Detente is an improvement in formerly poor relations. And the context in which we're talking about this is between the Soviet Union and the United States of America between 1969 and 1979. And what was a cause of Detente? Well, let me tell you. They were socio-economic and military and diplomatic. Well, and I think the Vietnam War encapsulates all of those factors in one. And that's because America was bogged down in Vietnam in the 1960s and 1970s and therefore wanted to lower tension with the Soviet Union because they were trying to stop the spread of communism in the Orient. The Soviet Union also wanted to de escalate tensions with the USA because they had been spending far too much money on the nuclear arms race. And they wanted to create the workers' paradise, which communism promised, by creating better consumer goods for the Soviet citizens. Detente kicked off with SALT 1. SALT 1 stands for Strategic Arms Limitation Talks. And these talks were between Richard Nixon, the President of the United States of America, and Leonid Brezhnev, who was the Soviet premier. In these talks, they de-escalated the nuclear arms race by limiting the amount of nuclear weapons each side had. It took 3 years for these talks to be signed off, and it was deemed a success, and this is really the kickstart of the Detente period. I would say the high point of Detente are the Helsinki Accords, or Helsinki Agreements, signed in 1975. These came in 3 buckets. The first was security. So the borders in Europe were deemed to be inviolable, and the USSR officially accepted that Germany, or West Germany, was a country. Secondly, there would be economic, cultural, and scientific links between the USA and USSR, symbolised in the Soyuz Apollo missions, and human rights would be respected by both sides. This is the handshaking space. Now, don't those Americans and Soviets look just like best friends? And this is SALT 2, which isn't seen as a great success. Jimmy Carter and Leonid Brezhnev weren't seen to be totally sincere with each other in these talks, and let me explain why. Jimmy Carter was accused of being too soft on the Soviets. And when the Soviet Union invaded or intervened in Afghanistan, most historians deem that as the end of Detente because the Americans no longer trusted the USSR and they saw this as an aggressive move on the USSR's behalf. So, what were the consequences of Detente? Well, many historians just think that Detente lacked impact. Was it merely just convenient between the USA and USSR at a time when they both were maybe reeling from other events? And maybe one of the largest consequences, or most significant consequences, of the phase of Detente was the emergence of Ronald Reagan as a new president of the USA. Now, this was a man that was very different to Jimmy Carter. He would do things differently. We're talking about Star Wars, we're talking about Reaganomics, and he wanted to push the USSR right back.